right, moving into this next approach, it's the unit study approach. Now, I'll just tell you, it's the one I did the longest in my journey. It's the one I settled on. I started off like many homeschoolers with a boxed approach because I felt comfortable with it, telling me what to do. I didn't know what I was doing, or I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. I got a little bit of information from it, but then realized it really didn't suit my kids, and then enjoyed homeschool freedom by moving into something that I enjoyed. I also used the classical approach for part of my homeschooling, and I've used parts of the Charlotte Mason with my homeschooling. Now, I encourage you at this point, as I'm going through these approaches, to really make one approach your dominant approach. Otherwise, you can just make it completely hard on you and your kids. And when I mean your dominant approach, that means for the most part, you follow this way. It's okay to be eclectic and an eclectic homeschooler, but even eclectic homeschoolers have one particular underlying approach they follow, and then they add facets from the other homeschool approaches. So unit study approach ended up being the one that I've used the most with my kids. It wasn't the one I used at the beginning because I didn't feel comfortable with it. But let me explain what is a unit study. A unit study is taking a unit of information, a topic, not so much a subject, taking a topic and studying that topic, then all of the subjects are focused around it. For example, if we take the topic of the rainforest that we have done, or even Westward Ho that we have done, that's one of the ones that we have done as well, then the idea is to study subtopics that match up to subjects in that topic. So for example, if we did Westward Ho, we would read personal narratives of persons that rode the wagons, that were on the wagons. If we studied geography, we studied about the jumping off points that they were at, or where they stopped, and where the wagon wheels showed. If we were doing a geography of the US, it makes geography come alive. It makes reading come alive because we're not reading boring textbooks. Unit study, like the unschooling approach and the Charlotte Mason approach, they all believe in living books, books that really bring a topic alive. They're opposed to boring textbooks or a dry reference book. They're more narrative form. So we would study the science of the plants that they would find along the way. We would learn life skills, like how did those early pioneers survive? What did they cook on the trail? What did they learn about? What animals did they see in each state? We learned a little bit of the history of the state, what was going on with statehood, who was the president then. See, those are topics or things that rabbit trails that you would go off. And this is why we like the unit study approach, because then subjects made sense. They were tied to what it was that we were interested in learning about. Now, here's the things to think about, because like I said, every approach has a consideration. Some parents feel there's a lot of prep time for the teacher, and there is a lot of prep time for the teacher. Sometimes it's not as easy to find application or bodies of knowledge for each level of kids that you have. But the same thing that makes it hard is also one of the things that I enjoyed about it, and that is I could teach all of my kids together regardless of the age. I could always find something that interests the younger one on that same topic. It doesn't have to be the same lesson plan versus something that interested the older one. But just having one book or one spine, as we call it, that's another term in the homeschool world. A spine is something that you use as your major reference. It could be a book, it could be a magazine, it could be literature, it could be an essay, it could be a speech. It's something that you're using as a framework, as a spine, if you will, to hold up everything else that you're teaching. So you would use that, and then you would just wrap concepts around that and tie them in to that spine that you have. So it's taking one topic and studying all the subjects around it. It's kind of like throwing a themed party. You tell everyone we're having a 50s, everything is themed. That's what a unit study is. And the reason I liked it is because even though it was a lot more work and prep at the beginning, we could really dive deep into studying topics that interest my kids. Like I said, my kids have homeschooled from the beginning. They love learning. They're not used to moving so fast on concepts. And when they study topics, they want to stay longer. They want to delve deeper. It really feels a child's love for learning. They really have, if a child has a huge appetite for learning, unschooling feels it too. And unit study feels it. Now, there are some unit study curriculum providers that have come on the scene. There wasn't so many when I was doing it, but a lot more now. But still at that, it's always fun to make your own unit studies. Now, here's how I adjusted it, because you can see the obvious, perhaps, downside for some parents is that not all skills get covered. So sometimes you can't find a math application for a particular topic. For example, it's easier to find, or just think quickly off the top of your head, a math topic or concept for the rainforest, where you can measure rain, and you could talk about that in comparisons. You could do some charts for the rainforest. Whereas a Westward Ho topic, you're like, okay, I need to think a little bit harder about what a math concept could be. I mean, you could think, a pioneer had X number of supplies when he started. He dropped them halfway through the middle of the trip. How many did he have left over? That's pretty elementary, right? And sometimes unit studies are based, certain topics are based for certain ages if you think about the topics. But any topic that your kid want to study, they could really delve in deeper into them. You can make them as hard as you want to. So how I would do it is I just didn't stress over it. All my kids had math that was on their level. I didn't worry about it. If we could cover a math in the unit study, we did. So that's the tip to how to use a unit study. Don't try to make it bend and mold and fit every topic. Westward Ho was obviously a good topic to learn about who the artists were at that time. They were really making the dream of the wild, of the West, really wild. They were making it come alive, and really in all their artists and their prints, were really making it like a bigger than life type of situation when they moved out to the West. And even the rainforest, there's beautiful art that you can study about that. But some of the other topics, you just can't fit art into it, or science or history. So if you can't, I didn't worry about it. I always had something on the back burner, say, here, let's just study this. So it was very loose what I had as far as preset curriculum. But math was always one I had, and I got more reference books. We used books for guiding our writing. So if we wanted to write about the pioneers, we wanted to write about the book where they were talking to, he was writing in his diary and talking about what it was out there on a covered wagon, I would have my kids write about it because it was so inspiring. But we would use reference books to help them with their writing. Okay, so now the thing with the unit studies is the same thing to think about with unschooling, and that is sometimes it's not easy to measure benchmarks and how our children are progressing from grade to grade. And like I said, this wasn't something I started off with in the beginning. I wish I had started a little bit earlier, but I started pretty quick into my homeschool journey. But I didn't need as many benchmarks, because once you teach your kids how to read and write, once you see their writing and how much they love learning compared to when they first start, then you don't need as many of those benchmarks or reassurances. Oh, okay, well, we really made a lot of progress this year. And like I said, too, my math workbook, we were able to keep that on grade level. We went right through that. So sometimes that's a consideration. And if you have to meet state laws, it's not as easy to meet them if you don't have some laid out curriculum. Okay, so some of the things I enjoyed about it, like I said, is that I didn't want to have to just review some of these same topics over and over. If we studied one topic, we stayed on it sometimes for 4 weeks. And sometimes we didn't even come back to the topic because we studied so many different things about it. It was such a fascinating study. So review and reteaching for unit studies is very limited because of how deep you can go on your child's interest. The other thing you have to think about is sometimes gathering resources can be overwhelming. But again, my tip on that is limit it to just 1 or 2 spines. In other words, this is a good book to guide us on what we're going to learn about this topic. We're going to keep it to this, and everything else is going to help us to do that. That's how I was able to overcome it. And then, of course, more parental time is involved. But we enjoyed the hands-on, we enjoyed the projects, And then there's always ways, just like unschooling, for your children to present mastery, whether they're having a play, whether they're putting on at the co-op, whether they're reciting a poem to each other, whether you start your morning off with the kids reciting poems. There's always ways that your kids can improve mastery of what they have learned. Those are just a few ways. And then, of course, not all subjects are covered equally, because sometimes if you get a topic, maybe it's a literature unit study based on a book. Those also are fun to do. Sometimes they may be more history-based or more character building or more science-y. So some of the other subjects aren't really folded in. So sometimes some homeschoolers feel like you can become lopsided. And that could be one of the considerations to think about on the unit study approach. Okay, we're going to be moving into the next approach.